Well, a night on the town in Boone thinned out the audience a bit. How many of you are hungover? You lie. I don't know what's in the program. I had to ask backstage what I was supposed to talk about, and they said something about the role of the university, and I think that's been, after 2 days, has been pretty much exhausted, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about miracles, and having been a Cleveland Cavaliers fan, we now believe in sin, forgiveness, and redemption. The block on Iguodala's shot was just, I mean, that's legendary. And I'm sorry for you Warriors fans, but I've got to rub it in. That was amazing. Anyway, miracles happen, and you all are part of a miracle happening here in North Carolina. Thanks to Jed and Jeff and all the staff that do such a great job putting this event on every year. And you all are leaders. So I want to talk about politics, and I want to pick up where Amory Lovins and Bill McKibben left it on this stage Monday night. And I wanted that was a really interesting dialogue. It could have gone on for hours, but let me pick up this. And if you the bookends of the rational debate about climate change and hence what we do about it are framed by two curves. This would be Amory Lovin's curve. No name Amory for 30 or 40 years, and he has been the most persistently brilliant analyst of the energy system. I want to talk about the context of that system a little bit this morning, but this is the price of PV, and you could do another similar chart with PV adoption and wind adoption and so forth, exponentially dropping prices. Elaine and I built a solar-powered house in 1980. We made every mistake you can make on it, making a solar-powered house. We did aim it to the south, but that was the one thing we did right. But the cost of PV in 1980 was just off the chart, totally prohibitive, and it was until 4 or 5 years ago. We did an 11-acre photovoltaic array in Oberlin 4 years ago, which penciled out fine for the Oberlin Board of Trustees. This 11-acre, 2.27 megawatt rated array. It turns out a little bit more because it's a tracking array. But if we had done that same array this summer, the cost would have been about half of what we paid 4 summers ago. And it was still a good deal 4 summers ago. But anyway, if this is what you look at, think of this as one side or one bookend of this debate. This is Bill McKibben. Bill is looking at the other side of this, and the other side is this relentless, remorseless biospheric changes. And so whether it's ocean acidification or in this case, accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, this is his take on things. Both of these are true. If you focus on one, you're an optimist. If you focus on the other, you're just not so sure, as Bill said, that we're going to make it. And that was the very end of his talk. Both are true. Both have strong economic data, real-world data in Amory's case, and real-world data in the case of CO2 emissions and ocean acidification, species extinction, and so forth. And so there's no, if you were betting in an intergalactic betting parlor, you wouldn't bet on us. You wouldn't bet on Homo sapiens to make it. It's going to be a tough race. And then this is a graphic that appeared about a month ago in the Washington Post. But take a look at this. The inner red ring is 1.5 degrees centigrade warming. That was selected by the people, all the delegates at COP21 in Paris, as the guardrail for safety. It used to be 2 degrees centigrade warming, and as Bill said, the more we know, the more we follow this, the more we realize it's coming faster, bigger, will last longer than we had thought even a few decades ago. And so this, as you notice, that final outer ring begins to blow really close to 1.5 degrees centigrade. We're already at somewhere between 1 degree centigrade warming and 1.2 degrees centigrade, depend on who you believe on this. But at that point, all bets are off. If we transgress that line, things get unpredictable in a hurry. And the theory has always been that we could raise the thermostat of the planet and nothing else wobbles outside. But now we know lots of other things happen. Syria goes into a climate change-driven drought condition, Syrian civil war, refugees in Europe, political turmoil every which way. And the number of refugees now is charted in the next decade or two to go up to 65 million refugees worldwide. This was released by NASA yesterday. We're on track to be the hottest year ever. 2014, as Bill said, was the hottest year recorded, and in 2015 blew past that by a big margin. 2016 appears to be on track to blow past 2015. This is not a good trend. Didn't have to be this way. And I think it's important. Somebody once said a long time ago, Nietzsche or somebody famous said that those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. And so the problem we have now is we've been passing, think of this as a superhighway, we've been passing off-ramps to better destinations than the one we're headed toward. And again, the bookends of the rational debate, Amory's exactly right. The cost of PV and wind is falling dramatically. Adoption rates are going up dramatically. We're far ahead of where anybody could have predicted we would have been a few years ago in terms of the adoption of a solar-powered world. And I want to pause here. I want to say this. If you define the problem as being powering the U.S. economy or the global economy by renewable energy and efficiency, that problem is probably solvable. The climate problem, Bill McKibben's problem, that CO2 curve, is not solvable in the same way. That is, carbon stays in the atmosphere for a long time. And so nobody in this room and none of your great-grandchildren will ever apparently live in a world again where CO2 levels drop below 400 parts per million. Remember, the background rate is 280 parts per million. They're in a brand new world. The word being given to it is the Anthropocene. We'll be lucky, I think, not to hit 450. And then the wild card in the deck is as you warm the Earth, we take the substantial risk of triggering methane releases both from seabeds and boreal forest soils. And methane, as you're aware, is much more potent greenhouse gas, 20 to 25 times more potent molecule for molecule than CO2. It's shorter lived in the atmosphere, but that doesn't change the problem we face. And so on one side, there is a solvable problem. Could we power the U.S. and civilization by renewable energy? I think the answer is yes. Does that solve the climate problem? No, it doesn't. It doesn't come close. We're now in this long-term transition. James Howard Kunstler calls this the long emergency, and that's a pretty good phrase for it. Paley Commission report in 1952. William Paley was the head of CBS. It was a federal report. He made the claim, or the report made the claim, or showed the evidence that we could have 13 million solar-powered houses very soon. Atomic Energy Commission, 1974, said 30% of our energy could come from solar by the year 2000. Didn't happen. It didn't happen because something went off the rails. And I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm not sure I'm an independent. I'm not quite sure what I am politically. But there was a time, and the older folks here in the room will remember this, there was a time when Republicans and Democrats could come together without name-calling and without a lot of animosity and actually with a lot of amity and goodwill. You play poker together. You do deals over, the third drink in a poker game and so forth. But we passed in 1969 with a Republican president and Republicans and Democrats, the National Environmental Policy Act. We created the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, and so forth. There was a time, and whatever is possible, as Kenneth Boulding once put it. So we've done these things. Now, in the history, and I don't want to demonize anything, but in the history of that time, and it's important that we remember the history, that was the Vietnam War era. And that was coming hard on the heels of a really rough decade for America. President Kennedy's assassination and Martin Luther King and then Robert Kennedy and cities on fire and so forth. And a lot of people got scared about that. One of them was Lewis Powell. Lewis Powell was a Richmond attorney, later appointed by Richard Nixon to the Supreme Court. He sent out a secret memo. And I want to ask all of you, how many of you have read the Powell memo? Any hands up? All right, I'm a professor or ex-professor. Your first assignment, your reading assignment, there'll be a quiz to follow, is to Google the Powell memo, read it. Read it. It is an important document. And what it did, it's important whether you're Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. It had big effects because it galvanized the business community to effectively, as he put it, counterattack these radicals that were destroying capitalism. So whatever your opinion about the report is, this is not my point. Read it. It had major effects. That was the start of the Federalist Society and lots of other organizations listed on the screen. So it had a major effect. It tended to polarize the debate. Now I want to show you this picture. Years back in 1970s, when Jimmy Carter was governor of Georgia, I was a sometime consultant to the governor on environmental issues. And in 1976, when he was running for the presidency, he came into the office one day and he wanted a report on the biggest environmental issue his administration would face. And I was assigned, along with a friend of mine, Cecil Phillips, to put the report together. And so we got a bunch of really, really smart people. We pulled them together. This picture was taken at Wolf Creek, Georgia. Now you'll notice that is Amory Lovins. That's a young Amory Lovins. He had just published, the Foreign Affairs article was out when he came to Wolf Creek. So that's Amory Lovins sitting at the latest technological advance, which was an IBM Selectric typewriter. Now those of you who are younger, you don't know what a typewriter is. Google it. Amazing machine. Find out. And you sat there and you did kind of what you do on any keyboard, but then you had to hit the button or push a button, and it was the carriage. The carriage was not a cart. It was a thing that went across the typewriter. I'll explain all that later afterwards. Now, what's interesting, the guy on the left is Eugene Odum. And Eugene Odum was the father, is really still the father of modern ecology as a science. He wrote the definitive textbook back about 1951. The Center for Ecology, or Institute for Ecology at the University of Georgia, was a creation of Eugene Odum. His father was a professor at UNC in Chapel Hill, a very famous sociologist. His brother, who Gene claimed was the only genius his mama ever gave birth to, Howard Odum, was the founder of the whole science of energetics and the study of energy and so forth. So this is ecology dictating to the smartest guy on the planet. And Amory knows, by the way, what sustainability means. He just won't tell anybody. But that's a whole other subject. But this is interesting. This is 1976, 5 years after the Powell memo. And at the time, Amory had written a blockbuster paper, still the most read paper in the history of foreign affairs, which is one of two or three of the major policy journals in the United States and in the world. And in that paper, Amory did what smart people do. He did the obvious thing that nobody had seen. He went to the other side of the spectrum and said, you know, instead of increasing supply and paving over all this and drilling and mining everything until America was just one huge mine or oil well, you go to the other side. We're in end use, least cost end use analysis. You duct tapes and you tape up things and you insulate and you do all the things that smart people do with their houses. And it would save you, and he actually ran the math. And the actual story the subsequent story is pretty close to what he defined as the soft energy path in that paper. But that wasn't the only thing. At about the time in the late 70s, there was a report that came out of the Carter administration. It was led by Gus Speth, who at that time was the head of the Council on Environmental Quality, called the Global 2000 Report. And had we followed the Global 2000 Report, I don't think 9/11 ever would have happened. It laid out a blueprint, not perfect, but in retrospect, that laid out a blueprint that would have taken us off the hard path faster. The combination of Lovin's Foreign Affairs paper and the Global 2000 report gave a blueprint with enough details that could have been the basis of national policy, but we didn't adopt that. America decided it was morning in America again, and we went on an Australian walkabout. So in this, why were we late getting to this game? We knew enough in the 50s to start. We knew a lot more in the 60s. And the first warning to a U.S. president about climate change was 1965 to Lyndon Johnson. And the science went back to Svante Arrhenius, the Swedish scientist who actually ran the numbers back in 1898, that if you burn enough fossil fuels, you will change climate. We've known a lot, and we didn't act. Part of why we didn't act, and part of the reason that Exxon and other corporations have been so powerful, is that the role of the corporation is excessively large relative to our future prospects. And so the first item, the Santa Clara County case, is the landmark case, which the Supreme Court has said to have decided that corporations were covered under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. They had the rights of persons. Now, you and I are persons. We can be in one place one time. We're mortal, we die, limited assets, and so forth. Corporations are abstract bundles of money searching for the highest rate of return. But to call them persons created an enormous kind of mischief. It gave them legal protection to do lots of things that we now regret, including change the climate. 2 books. Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money, is worth reading, and Zephyr Teachout's book is kind of the history of corruption in America. Read them. If you want to know why we missed the off-ramps to better futures than we are now on a path to, read those 2 books. Money in American Politics had a pernicious effect. One of the effects was this. This is my electoral district. The little red arrow points to Oberlin, Ohio. But that is our congressional district and our congressperson to the right, and you had to draw the district to make sure that that's a safe district for Jim Jordan. He is a far right-wing Republican by the most poll data that you can gather from Senate aides or House aides and so forth. He is one of the least effective, but hardcore right-wing. He couldn't get elected in a more distributed district. But gerrymandering works for both Republicans and Democrats, but it has locked us into a very extreme period in American politics. There's this problem. Lots of people have very little, and very few have a great deal. You can't run a democracy like that. Oxfam did a report a year or so back that you could put 65 people, all of them easily fittable on this stage, have more net wealth than the bottom 3.7 billion people on the planet. That's no way to run a sustainable planet. I want to say a few words, and then I want to get off the stage here because I'm out of time, but part of the problem is George Orwell. How many of you read Orwell in any of his books, but particularly 1984? Reread it. This is good reading. He says if you want to take over a country, the first thing you do, really, is to debase the language, not the currency, but the language, the currency of words and thought. You destroy the integrity of our words. But look at the words on the screen. What do those mean now? And when did patriotism come to define the patriotism required to defend our land, its climate, and the future? That's patriotism of a higher sort. How did it get so demeaned? This is liberalism, and this is not an argument for liberalism, but it has been so corrupted in the public dialogue to admit that you're a liberal is a heresy. But look at what liberalism gave us. It wasn't perfect, but liberalism and conservatism are the flip sides of a coin of political maturity. They're not opposite. They're necessary to each other. And it's important now, especially with the Republican convention now, you have your opinion, I'd have mine about it, but a solidly conservative party is important in this country. And a good liberal party is important. And it's important in our language as we describe our collective differences, not debase, demean, and confuse the subject. Back on the subject of conservatism. Edmund Burke said these words in a little book he wrote in 1790, called Reflections on the Revolution in France. And what he said was really important. He said that we in the current generation, we're just trustees. And our job is to pass on an entailed inheritance from the distant past to the distant future. We're just trustees. And that entailed inheritance is laws and customs and religion and culture. It's all those things we really value. Our job is as trustees to make sure that our descendants have the same benefits we have. If that also includes the ecological and climatic conditions necessary for those things to happen, and that's a change I think Burke would have agreed to, then we know that that is part of that entailed inheritance. We're obligated, and this is the founder of modern conservatism. So Burke's view of politics would look like this. Left and right come together. They're not different or differing in some measure. They're part of the same cultural dialogue, and really the real dialogue is present versus future. And that's the real political dialogue. Our language doesn't reflect that. It's become increasingly divisive and so forth. Some concluding thoughts. You got to change the rules of the system. And for those of you who are students and all of you that work with students, liberate them to change. And these are some of the pictures of change around the country. These are legal cases. That was the previous slide. It was a group of kids that started a whole farm enterprise to feed a campus, Sonoma State College or State University in California. And Pope Francis, Laudato Si. If you haven't read that one, read that one also. Because what he does in that is to change the dialogue from just economic self-interest in technology to morality. What drives our technology is our heart and our thinking. But it starts with heart first. 3 final slides. Before he died, my good friend Ray Anderson sent me this quote. It's taken from a book by Karl Heinrich Robert and his colleagues at The Natural Step. but to define this in the quote as a systems problem. You can't solve climate change or the energy problem without seeing it in a larger package. We started that process in the 1950s, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, and then we got derailed. And the causes are complicated. I've hinted at a few of them here, but we got derailed. But it's a systems problem. And I submit that the word systems is the most radical word in the English language, because it says, if when you take it seriously, that we're in all this together. There's no me isolated from you. You are, therefore I am, as a friend of mine puts it. We are part of a system, and it is also the most complicated thing we can think about. As Gregory Bateson described it, the pattern that connects all of us is a complicated pattern. It takes a lifetime of study. But for all of you in education, systems thinking is the heart of what we have to do. So the upshot is this. You all represent anchor institutions. Colleges and universities are going to be there for a long time. And we are, as fate would have it, I think as rightly so, we're the deciders of this future. Will we make it or will we not make it? So when Bill McKibben says it's still up in the air, the question comes back, I think, more than to any other group, not corporations necessarily or government people or media. It's up to us. We're the people who decide how young people think. And then finally, let me close with this. This is Martin Luther King's great quote. He actually gave this first at the commencement talk at Oberlin College, where I'm employed, in 1965. It was published as his Fierce Urgency of Now speech. And there is such a thing as being too late. And once we pass that final off-ramp to a better future, then it is just too late. I don't believe we're there yet. And I take faith and comfort in the fact that all of you are making sure that we're not going to be too late. And that's what the Appalachian Energy Summit is all about. So thank you to all of you for not being too late.